Welcome back, everyone, to Think Torah. Here's another episode of Torah Game Changers. Today I have with me R Yaakov Klein. He's the founder of the Lost Princess Initiative, the LPI, which is helping Jews connect to the soul of our tradition. LPI sends out a Chasidus daily, and it's distributed on WhatsApp. It could also be found on their Facebook page. He's also the author of the Thank You Hashem newsletter, which just reached its first year anniversary. To date, he's authored 2 books. The Sunlight of Redemption, which is a translation of Likutei Moharan. He's also the author of Sparks from Berdichev. His next book, which is coming, confirmed, The Story of Our Lives. It's an in-depth understanding of Rabbi Nachman's famous story, The Lost Princess, which will be in stores soon. Yaakov is also a lecturer and musician, just trying to share the inner dimension of the Torah. He's a contributor both on YU Torah and Times of Israel, and his articles, poems, and books have reached and inspired thousands of Jews worldwide. Yaakov, I'm sorry about that. Thank you for joining me. Here you are, guys.
I would add one final thing, which I think underscores the whole thing and important, is aspiring Jew. Aspiring Jew. Sometimes it sounds very impressive when you hear all these things, but the truth is that at the core of it is just a Jew who's trying to find his way. And if you can help other people, even one other person, find their way as well on this journey along with him, then dayenu. That's the goal.
And I totally, that's such an important point that I say that also about myself. I'm just a Jew, and all my things are extensions of that Jewness. And I do this in my home. I do this in my family. And then Bezras Hashem, it gets expanded outwards. So Yaakov, just obviously, your background is important, but you don't have to go into detail, but just tell me a little bit about yourself, where you came from, but mainly why is the Lost Princess Initiative somewhere that you feel something that you feel so important to project
Sure.
to do?
Sure. Okay. So let me first begin just by way of context, because I think that in the beginning, when I started with the Lost Princess Initiative, we did a soft launch, which we have not yet done the full launch. Be'ez Hashem, there's a website coming. There's a lot of programming. Actually, tonight we're about to announce another program. There's a webinar course that's going to be based on the book that's coming, and a lot of incredible things. A lot of resources. So it's sort of in its infancy, but B'ezrat Shmaya, we're off to a great start. So a lot of people, when I first went public with the name The Lost Princess Initiative, for those that aren't familiar with Rabbi Nachman's tale, The Lost Princess, which this organization is based off of, right? Because the book, The Story of Our Lives, is an exploration and elucidation of the story, and off the back of the ideas in the book, the whole organization is built. So people are like, is this some sort of shidduch initiative? Is this like, what's the Lost Princess? What does this mean? Who is she? And when did I have her? When did I lose her? So
Should we go find her?
Should we go find her, right? My father-in-law, is busy with that all the time, asking me if I found the Lost Princess yet. But I think it's very, very important just in the beginning to explain a little bit on a basic level the metaphor, which will then understand or bring us into the understanding of what we're trying to accomplish, right? And so just on a very, very basic level, Rabbi Nachman's story, without getting into the details, Be'ez Hashem, I hope you all buy the book. But Rabbi Nachman's story is basically about a princess that gets lost. I mean, that we could have guessed, right? That's in the title, The Lost Princess. And this princess is taken to a place called the Palace of the Lo Tov, a place of no good. The paradigm of evil, the paradigm of darkness. And a viceroy, the second in command of the king, chooses of his own accord, out of his great love for the king, to go on a journey to seek her. And the entire story, even though it's called The Lost Princess, is really more about the viceroy, about the search for the princess, than the actual finding. Spoiler alert, at the very end, Rabbi Nachman says he finds her, but we don't even know how. Rabbi Nachman doesn't actually tell us how he finds her. And the Mefarshim explained that it's talking about the coming of Mashiach, it's talking about the release of the Shechina, us coming back into that intimate relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, which it wasn't in Rabbi Nachman's purview, right, or his ability, or his reshus. He wasn't given permission to reveal exactly how that would come about. Be that as it may, the majority of the story is talking about the search of the viceroy, and it's not a pretty search. It's not very clear. It's not very easy. There are many triumphs, but more disasters and downfalls and slip-ups, and the conditions that the princess eventually gives him that he needs to fulfill in order to free her, he manages to hold on to for a whole year until the very last day, and then he eats from a tree that he wasn't supposed to eat from, an obvious reference to Adam and Chava, or he drinks from a river that he wasn't supposed to drink from, and that's a reference to the Chet of the Egel, the two Batei Mikdash, a lot of symbolism in the story, but ultimately it's about the struggle and the journey of this viceroy and the yearning that he has and that conviction that there is a princess and that she needs to be freed, and it's about that sort of internal and emotional and spiritual journey that he takes to free the princess. Now, what is the princess, right? That's of ultimate importance in order to understand what the import of the viceroy's journey is. And the Mefarshim all explain that the princess is on a very basic level the reference to the neshama. The neshama in the Sfarim HaKadoshim is always associated with the feminine. The neshama is always associated with the internal point, that emotional aspect of connectivity, that relationship aspect with Avodas Hashem, with others. When we say that a marriage has neshama, what does that mean? It means that there's a passion there. It means that there's an intimacy there. It means that there's a real connection there. And the princess becomes lost both in our lives as individuals, but I think perhaps more importantly, as a community. And over the journey that Rabbi Nachman begins his story with the words, Baderech siparti maisa, on a journey I told a story. Over the journey that we take as individuals, I say from childhood to adulthood, but all of the different journeys throughout our lives, and all the ups and all the downs, and all the different areas and stages and different experiences that we go throughout the human condition, the princess gets lost. And that excitement of living, forget about spiritually for a second, just the excitement of living and the appreciation of the little blessings of life and seeing the beauty of a sunset and standing in front of a wonder like the Niagara Falls, something becomes lost, we become numb. And we become so wrapped up in our adult, sophisticated pursuits that sometimes we lose that spirit of youth. We lose that passion, that vitality, that natural joy that every child wakes up with in the morning, and that excitement to explore the world. Where I was walking with my son yesterday and we see a little snail on the floor, and it blew his mind. He's standing there for 5 minutes watching this snail. And I said to myself, if only I can be able to access even a percentage of this, how different my life would be. So in our own lives, emotionally, and in that experience we lose the princess communally. Spiritually speaking, we've lost the princess. Over the journey of the Jewish enterprise, throughout all of the ups and many, many, many devastating downs, we've come to this strange place where in America after the Holocaust, we've built up a remarkable society and institution of Judaism, which is incredible if you think about it. In a very short period of time, I understand the state of Israel physically and also spiritually managed to build itself up miraculously. But the societal institution of Yiddishkeit, of Frum Judaism in America, with all the yeshivas and the network of kollalim and all of the minion factories and the Pesach hotels, not this past year, but Eretz Hashem, this coming year, and the publications and the education programs and the gemachs galore for anything that a person can need, what the Frum community has managed to create is nothing short of miraculous. But oftentimes, and we discuss this a lot in the book, this is one of the big pair of buzzwords for the LPI and for this book, The Story of Our Lives, with the increase in quantity and the external aspect of the 6 sons of the king, as opposed to the princess, her 6 brothers, which is the masculine sort of external, sort of grand aspect of quantitative accomplishment and development. For some reason, the more we focus on the quantity, the quality that we're trying to protect and nurture seems to slip out of our hands and through our fingers. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, there are more people learning Torah today than ever before, but the question is, are we just pumping out robots, or are we pumping out people who are just coming out on an assembly line that are expected to do a certain thing, and that this is a societal expectation, what the Navi Yeshaya calls mitzvahs anashim elumada, just to go ahead by road and to do what we do because this was our background and this is what we're expected to do. But what happened to the neshama? What happened to the princess of wonder? What happened to the connection, the consciousness, the understanding that Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam means that it's the ultimate means toward the end of relating to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to the end unto itself, where Limud Torah and yeshivas can become sometimes, again, Chas v'Shalom, this is just hypothetical. Hopefully it's not the way that I'm describing, and it's certainly not the way that I'm describing. Baruch Hashem, there's a balance, and it's very much in the middle. We're trying to move the needle a couple of degrees closer closer to the princess side of things. But of course, it's a mix. But oftentimes you can have in yeshivas where Limud Torah is taken out of this experiential relationship building and this consciousness that we're sitting with the Nosein HaTorah and connecting with him in the deepest way, and it becomes about how many daf you could learn, right? And what kind of pshetel you could say, and now you can get up and impress this one and impress that one, and we're trying to go ahead and to bring back that neshama. So that's what the story is. That's what the book is about. There's a lot of details in between. It's about a 600-page book. There's a lot of symbolism and depth on every chapter. And to me, this is my personal mandate and my personal mission. It's something that I felt throughout my journey through the yeshiva system, and I went to wonderful yeshivas. I always felt that there was mashu chaserli, that something was missing. A focus on wearing a hat and jacket, a focus on tzitzis out, a focus on white shirts or blue shirts or whatever these things were. It always frustrated me. I don't know exactly why, but I always had it in me that I just felt like, is this what this is all about? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu came onto our scene and said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and we had Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and we brought monotheism to the world, and we had the 10 Commandments that changed world society, and this is what Yiddishkeit is about. This is what it's all about.
So when did you get introduced to Chasidus and this inner dimension, the more pnimius of living? When did you get introduced to it?
So this itself is a little bit of an interesting journey itself. The truth is that it begins with my father. My father, even though he grew up in a post-Holocaust, child of Holocaust survivors, Hungarian home that was not Chassidish. Hungarian historically is called Oberlander. It's like sort of in between. It's a mix. They weren't the Mesnagdim, right? They weren't the Chassidim. The Chassam Sofer Kiyadua was very, very close with all the Chassidic masters, and he himself incorporated a lot of sod and a lot of that feeling. Sometimes if you if you're not looking at the heading in the Sefer Chassam Sofer, you could think he's wearing a shtreimel, sometimes, right? And so he came from a home that wasn't misnagdic, certainly not, but at the same time wasn't in any way, connected to a particular Chasidus. We come from a long line of Rabbanim. My great-great-great-great-grandfather, 5 greats up, Rav Shmuel Shmalka Selisher, was actually related to Rav Shmalka of Nikolsburg, who was a Talmud of the Maggid Mizrich, one of the early Hasidic masters, brother of the Hafla, and he was named after him. But at the same time, he was a Talmud of Chassam Sofer, and his son and their children, all the way down until the Holocaust, when 2 generations were murdered, Hashem Yikam Damam, were all Rav and Av based in over large swaths of that Hungarian area, Salish and Halmin, and different areas over there. So again, very rabbinic, very connected to to Limud Torah and to Torah education, but not connected to Chasidus. My father learned in a number of yeshivas. He learned in a yeshiva Torah V'das, right, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and many of the listeners are familiar with. And in Torah V'das, as he was learning there, the regular sort of yeshiva system, the yeshiva curriculum. So he noticed that there was one bacher in the yeshiva who seemed to have something special, a special spark. I don't know that he would have known to call it the neshama or the princess, but in the context of our conversation thus far, we can understand that he found it. Or al kalpanim, he was searching for it, right? And he was striving for it. And he was living in such a way that my father was sure there was something that he was privy to that nobody else was, because he was the most popular guy in the yeshiva. He had such a chiyas about him. His davening was with fire, and his learning was with fire, always besimcha and with amuna. And he had something that my father was desperately searching for. And my father approached him and he said, "What's your secret? What's the secret sauce? What do you have that nobody has?" And he answered him with one word, and it was a word that my father hadn't even heard about, and that those that had heard about that word would run in the other direction because of the stigma around it. And that word was Breslov. This Talmud's name, who was my father's classmate, I don't remember his first name, his last name was Wasilski. His father, Herschel Wasilski, was the one address in America, in the United States, where at that time you could buy Breslov Sfarim. He sold them out of his basement. He was the only place. Now you can find them in every bookshop and wherever you're looking, and even in a pizza shop, they'll bring them to you, right? There was no place in America that you could find the Breslov Sfarim, except for this, Rav Herschel Wasilski's basement. He sold them out of his house. He ran the American Friends for Breslov, out of his home. My father was drawn through this child of Rav Herschel Wasilski to Rav Herschel himself. They spent a year learning Likutei Moharan together, and anybody who knows, who's really serious about sitting down and giving Breslov a chance and learning Likutei Moharan, it's a game changer. I mean, there's nothing like it. There's absolutely nothing like it. It's a different experience of Limanat Torah. And my father was totally taken by it. My father went the next year to go to Eretz Yisrael to learn by Rav Shlomo Wolbe in R Yaakov. And this Rav Hershel Wasilski sent my father with a number of letters. And these letters were addressed to some of the leading lights, the leading names in the Breslov community, Rav Yaakov Meir Shachter, some names you'll be familiar with, Rev Levi Yitzhak Bender of the previous generation of Shmuel Shapira, Rev Elvul Cheshin, the father of Tzvi Cheshin of Mir fame. And in this letter it said, take this American bacher and be mekar of him and bring him close. And my father immediately had an in with people who others, certainly now, I mean, you want to go to Rav Yaakov Meir Shachter, you have to wait for weeks, if not months sometimes, to get into him. My father became a ben bayis, mamish, by Rav Yaakov Meir Shachter. He slept in his bedroom, he was by his house all the time. This was because Breslov was just fledgling, it was starting, right? And it hadn't blown up yet into what it is, Baruch Hashem, today, and it continues to grow by leaps and bounds daily. So we grew up in a house where Breslov was certainly on our consciousness. It wasn't pushed in the sense of learning the Breslov Svarim. I never opened the Breslov Sefer, certainly not in the context of limud with my father until my adult life on my own, which I'll get to in a minute. My father never took us to Uman. It's me and my older brother. My father took my older brother once, and that was it. The rest are, Baruch Hashem, we have 6 sisters, and I'm the youngest of 8. And so from that aspect, there wasn't this very strong, like understanding of what Breslov was. It was just like we knew my father's Breslov. We didn't, you understand. It wasn't something that I even knew what it meant. My father would speak about the tzaddikim a lot, which in Breslov is a very strong, foundation. Is emunas chachamim. My father was very, very strong in that. And Rabbi Nachman was one of the tzaddikim that my father would speak about often. My father would always say mishalim and stories. We grew up with some of the Art Scroll, on BRI, Breslov Research Institute. We grew up with some of their children's books. Actually, The Lost Princess was one of them that I connected very much with, and the illustrations by David Sears are just a very, very strong part of my childhood that obviously led to to what I'm involved with today. But throughout that experience, it wasn't a personal identity. This was what my father was, and that's really where it remained. When I came to Eretz Yisrael to learn, I was in a little bit of a difficult phase in my life. Without getting into the pratim, just emotionally and spiritually, I felt a little bit out of touch. I felt a little bit disenfranchised, like I mentioned before, of the yeshiva system and going through the regular teenage stuff. I had skipped 8th grade, so I was a year younger when it was time to leave high school. I was 17 years old, as opposed to most of the class that was 18, and I came straight to Eretz Yisrael. And I came, like you mentioned in our pre-podcast discussion, I came to a yeshiva called Shari Tivuna, which was led, if you'll remember, of Elia Levin, right? Who anybody who knows and who hung around with him knows that he's a singular personality and a very charismatic and unique individual, a very big mix and synthesis between mind and heart. This was Rabbi Levin, and he mamish took me under his wing, and I was his project, and we sat and we learned together, and we spent many long hours talking together, and he really reintroduced me, to Yiddishkeit in this very beautiful way that he has, to be able to mix the Limanat Torah aspect with the other elements of Yiddishkeit that are oftentimes obscured in the pursuit of Limanat Torah as an end, as opposed to the means. For example, Shabbos Kodesh, right? It was the first time that, really Shabbos as an avoda was on our consciousness. Eretz Yisrael, we were coming to learn in Israel. I wasn't passionate, we don't come from a Zionist background. I wasn't passionate about the land. But Rabbi Levin, reintroduced us to that, to tzaddikim, to what that meant, tzaddikim. And where did he get this from? Reb Shlomo Carlebach. And as strange as it may sound for Rabbi Levin, having learned in Long Beach and having learned in Lakewood and having learned in some of the finest Litvish yeshivas, where I think back when he was in Long Beach, you had to play Carlebach under your covers at night and you weren't allowed to have a guitar. Obviously, all of that has changed also. We'll discuss that as well. But Rabbi Levin was very heavily impacted, by Reb Shlomo. And so he had that side to him. He was a Baki in Sfas Emes, and he's not a Chassid by any stretch of the imagination. There are a lot of things that he doesn't subscribe to. And he's, very much...
He wore like a long, like a I don't know, record. I don't know what it's called.
I think when he goes to America more, he wore that. On Shabbos, yes. On Shabbos, he wears a frock.
Yeah, Shabbos. Right.
Shabbos, he wears a frock. He has long payas that he puts like a ger under his. So he's a big mix. He's a big mix. To some, it was confounding, and to me, it was comforting. It was beautiful to be able to see someone who brings it together. So through Rabbi Levin, I began to go to the source, and I began to listen to Rabbi Shlomo. And one of Rabbi Levin's lines about Shlomo Carlebach is that music was his smallest talent. People think that Rabbi Shlomo was a performer, was a musician. Music was his smallest talent. What was his biggest talent? Either his biggest talent was people, was relationships. He would remember your name after 30 years, having met you one time, and just exchange a name, and you're the holiest and the sweetest, and 30 years later, he would remember you. He had a phenomenal memory and a phenomenal knack for relationships. But more so than that was his ability to give over. Chasidus was chad b'dara. And many people listen to him and they'll say, oh, that it's simplistic, right? Many people will listen and sound like he's watering it down. But then you go back to the sources and you open up the sources in the actual Sfarim Makdash and the Ishbitzer, which he quoted so much from the Me'ashilach and the Beis Yaakov and the Seid Yisharim. You look at those tzaddikim and you see the piece inside and you say, he really got it. He really understood it in a way that I never would have understood it. You learn the Kutimran. Sometimes he's reading out of a page of the Kutimran, and I know that lesson, and I know that Rabbi Nachman didn't say that, right? I know what he's reading from, Kuf Yud Beis, something he's reading from some Torah, and then I open it up and I'm learning it, and I say, you know something? This is exactly what Rabbi Nachman was saying. This is exactly what he meant. And because he wasn't giving it over in an intellectual sort of way, so those that are looking for that are a little bit turned off. But the truth is, Rabbi Shlomo would say about those that became from through him and then left him in search for greener pastures, right? Rabbi Shlomo would say, they thought that I was kindergarten and now they're graduating to a college. But he said, they don't realize that I was giving them college stuff. And he's absolutely right. It's the deepest, mamish the deepest. And so it was the teachings of Reb Shlomo that I was drawn to. I'm a musical guy, and so I was drawn to the music certainly, but it was the teachings. It was the stories that I would just sit under my covers and mamish cry, and feel what he was describing. This Yiddishkeit that was lost, this pre-war experience of Yiddishkeit in the simplest sense of the Tehillim Zugger who sat in the back of the shul, who didn't have that grand sort of that grand portfolio filled with his Yiddishkeit and what it's all about and what he's able to do, but it's just these tear-drenched words of Tehillim. And to hear about Jews like this, hear about the Lamed Vav Tzaddikim that on the outside they look like the simplest people and they're mamash holding up the world, to hear all these concepts you never know, all these different catchphrases and all these different words that Reb Shlomo would use to describe Judaism, Yiddishkeit, mamish Yiddishkeit. It cut into me in a very, very deep way. And when he started talking about Rabbi Nachman, Yadua Reb Shlomo, drew very much from Breslov. He was a little bit Chabad, he was a little bit Breslov, he was a little bit Mudjitz, he was a little bit Babav, he was very much Ishbitz. There's a recording where he says, I'm an Ishbitzer Chassid, and those who understand the theology of Ishbitz can also understand where Reb Shlomo fits into the context of Ishbitz, right, in some of his personal decisions. But Reb Shlomo drew very heavily from Breslov. And Reb Shlomo, to me, was cool. As an 18-year-old, and you're hearing about this hippie rabbi, and you're here, and you go down to the Moshav, and you see the way that they chill, and the way that they run their community over there. You spend the Shabbos, you go to the Moshav fair. It's a culture, a culture has sprung up around Reb Shlomo that was intensely cool to me, and I was in. I bought tcheles, and I was wearing these scarves, and I was all in. Because of Rabbi Levin's Kalbach connection, he has a very deep affinity for the city of Tzfat, where a lot of those sort of chevra hang out. And so once a year, in addition to a Shabbos in Tzfat, he would move the whole yeshiva up for a full week. And it wasn't vacation. It was a regular yeshiva in Tzfat. And every day he would give shir outside, and we would go for walking tours, and mamash 3 sedarim, regular yeshiva, nothing different, but just a change of pace. And it was on that week that we took with the yeshiva Shari Tvuna in Tzfat, where it was like the perfect storm. It was the Kalbach, it was the Breslov, it was my emerging interest in Avodas Hashem through Reb Shlomo, through the Limanat Torah that I was doing in Rabbi Levin's yeshiva. And I'll never forget, it was the Shabbos that we went to daven with some of the chevra in the Breslov shul there in Tzfat. If you've ever had the opportunity of davening there, it just aesthetically, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous shul, right? Murals and paintings and woodwork, and it's glorious. And for some reason, the Breslov community there, in terms of the way that they look, they just have a very charismatic, I don't know if it's the Chain Makam Al Yashveha, there's a certain Chain there. They're very distinguished looking Jews. And so we were davening there, and the davening, the Baal Tefillah davening so beautifully, and there's dancing, l'chadaydi, and there's just such a unique tzvat sort of atmosphere that I was privy to, that when they started clapping during Mariv, which Breslov, because of a few Torahs in Rabbi Nachman, in the Mems, if you look in Torah Mem Gimel to basically Mem Hey, Mem Vav, there's lessons about the secret of clapping during davening, which many Hasidim do, Karlin does as well, but in Breslov it's an avoida, it's a minig in Breslov to clap during davening, and when they started clapping, I started clapping, and when the guy next to me started clapping, my friend, I said, "You can't clap. You're not Breslov." I'm Breslov, and I just, in that moment, I just felt at home. I felt this is my place. This is. And everything, snowballed from there. I came back to Yerushalayim and I started, looking, is there a place like Tzvat in Yerushalayim? And I found a small place called Nekuda Tova. And the first time I walked in there, Mata Frank was giving a shir in Yiddish, which I understand, having gone to a Chasidus cheder. I can't speak a word of it, but I can understand it perfectly, which is a big privilege and asset. And that shir just propelled me to buy Likut Imran. And from the first page, I started from the beginning. I'll never forget. I came back to yeshiva. I opened up the Torah Aleph, which I eventually wrote a book on, and my life was changed. My life was changed, and it was here in this limud of Likut Imran, and then I went to Kedushas Levi, which I also wrote my first book on. And throughout the years, journeying through the Sfarim HaKadoshim, that I realized that this is the answer. That Chasidus, many people think, is a societal culture. Many people think that it's a mode of dress, it's a language, it's minhagim. But the truth is that all of this is what we would call the quantity of Chasidus, which is paradoxical, because Chasidus at its core, if you think that all the Talmidei HaMagid dressed alike, they all came from different parts of Europe, they all came from different backgrounds, there was no uniformity, there was no conformity. Chasidus at its core was a rebellion. Chasidus at its core was a counterculture movement, which is why it swept up this grassroots support throughout Eastern Europe and eventually throughout the world with such fury and fire. That's exactly why. And paradoxically, throughout the years, as there was this counter pull between the Misnagdim and the Hasidim, both making concessions, like I mentioned before in Long Beach, now they're doing Kumzitzin, and Panovich did a Tish, 2 years ago. So on both sides, there's been concessions, but largely with regard to the limud and the consciousness, Chasidus has very much adopted the regular yeshiva style of learning, and in doing so, has lost much of that pre-institutionalized spirit of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. And in the Sfarim, the spark is there. That's where it's contained. And when a person learns the Sfarim, and a person, which in many Chasidus, and they don't, pretty much, Breslov and Chabad are the two Chasidusin that are still really engaged on a daily basis with their Chasidus, with the actual study of the Chasidus.
That's a great point, because also through the LPI, through the Last Princess Initiative, I noticed this, that you're very text-based. Your shiurim are text-based. Everything you put out every day is text-based. The videos are less, but everything is text-based. And that's fascinating how that's an important to source it back to the original sources that we still have, and that
That's exactly right. And when you stop a person on the street and you ask them, in your mind, what are the two strongest Hasidic presences? Many people don't even know the Chabad is Hasidish. Like, I grew up, it was only till later on that I realized that these men with the funny squashed, down hats are Hasidish in the same way that Baba is Hasidish, right? But if they are familiar a little bit with Hasidus, they'll say Breslov and Chabad are taking over the world. Right? Why? Because those two are founded in their texts. If Karlin would be making Star and Be'iyun in Beis Aaron, they would also be on fire with that same passion of understanding that Chasidus is at its core a messianic movement. Now, what's different about Chasidus as a messianic movement and all the failed messianic movements over the past 200 years, many with devastating effects, for example, Shabsai Tzvi, for example, the difference in Chasidus is that it's messianic, but not about a figure, but rather about a consciousness that we believe is a process that has already begun and will continue to unfold until the Mashiach comes. So in that way, it combines the messianic fervor and belief of each and every Jew of every Jew with an optimistic and perhaps a radical optimism that the sun has already begun to rise. So Chasidus at its core is a messianic movement, and when we understand it as such, we can understand that if we're really learning Chasidus and if we're really connected to this consciousness and understanding that this is the answer for so many of the symptoms and so many of the problems that we have today, which I'll mention, I'll talk about again after this sentence, I don't want to lose it. Once we understand that and we're based in the text, so it becomes something that we have to share. It becomes something that we have to spread. It becomes something that we have to bring people into, not in a way of this like cultish sort of aspect, but just to go ahead and to remind people that we're not trying to make you anything that you're not. Chasidus is trying to go ahead and to reveal that which is already inside of you, that which you're deeply searching, which many people can't even express or articulate what it is that we're missing, but we're missing something, and it manifests in so many different angles and so many different roots. And Chasidus says, dress the way that you're dressing. Keep the place that you're living. Keep your shul. Yiddishkeit is Yiddishkeit as it is where you are. But it's a shift in consciousness that sort of takes ingredients that were in a fridge that's still a cake and puts it into a toaster oven. And it's the same cake with the same ingredients, but mashu acheret. It's a different experience. That's Chasidus. And this is why I feel so passionate about sharing these texts, these holy words, and these teachings of the tzaddikim, because I'm trying to go ahead and to give people this awareness that, yes, there are problems in Yiddishkeit, and there's tznius issues, and there's talking in shul issues, and, so many across the board. There are mental health issues, there are addiction issues. The Frum community, Blian Hara, is already plagued, with many things that are particular and unique to our experience. And we believe, when I say we, I mean myself and my Rebbe, Rav Moshe Weinberger, who over the years has become to me the paradigm, and that we call the captain of the ship of Chasidus for non-Chasidim. We believe collectively as a community, and it's growing by leaps and bounds daily, and LPI is a part of it. We believe that this is the answer, that this is the remedy, and that it's a remedy in the way of hikdim refuah lamaka, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the refuah 200 years ago before the plague, and that it literally speaking to all of the challenges of our time, that if we just did this, and if we just instituted, and it doesn't have to be with the word Chasidus or the name Chasidus, but if we were learning these limudim in our yeshivas, and if we gave our neshamos of this generation, our children, in elementary school and in high school, and certainly in Beis Medrash, and when we're preparing them for marriage, everything bepnimius, everything al derech remez, al derech sod, what Avram Avinu and what Yitzchak Avinu represent in as much as what they did and how to study their lives, we believe that it would change the game, and that it would increase the consciousness of Mashiach, and it would go ahead and literally enable the sun of Geula, the sunlight of redemption, as the title of my second book, continue to rise until we should be Zocheh the Mashiach Tzedekenu b'meir b'yameinu.
Amen. So, but this is much deeper to you than just Hasidic rituals. That's not what this is. Perhaps they come along, but it's so much deeper to you. And we see that with the fact that it's all rooted in text, and it's all rooted in the Sfarim themselves.
That's exactly. Yeah, I mean, people ask me all the time, because I have been, in addition to my teaching capacities as the, founder and director of LPI, I give a weekly shiur. Now, again, like I mentioned before, we're still in the kickoff stage, believe it or not. Baruch Hashem, are reaching thousands of people over the world, but it's just the very, very, very beginning. We have grand plans that have been in the motions for years in terms of, that initial conception, and for many, many months, up to a year of actual practical laying the foundation. You mentioned the website. We mentioned the website. The book that Be'ezer Hashem is in typesetting. It's going to be in stores worldwide very shortly. And the webinar course that we're going to be launching, a full curriculum examining each and every one of what we call the Lost Princess principles, 25 foundational core principles that emerge from the book that we're going to be exploring in the context of the text, inside the Svarim, where they come from, to see the words of the tzaddik. But in my capacities, I've also been, a Rebbe in yeshiva, right? For the past year and a half, I've been teaching in Maseret Tzion. Now I'm on a little bit of a break to focus on LPI stuff, but I taught there. I taught in Eshat Torah for a bit, and so I have, students who are both connected to the LPI and learning with me that way. In addition to hundreds of Jews around the world who I don't even know about, and contact me and say, "I just finished your series, on SoundCloud." That's the beauty of technology, which we'll talk more about. But in my capacity as Rebbe, and having those Rebbe Talmud, or that sort of sichas chaverim, like I always say, I'm not a Rebbe by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just a searching Jew, and I'm zocheh to sort of journey with many others that feel connected with what I'm connected with. But people ask me, when is the right time to put on a gartel? When is the right time, to start growing payas? When is the right time? V'chule, all these sorts of questions. And rooted in a tradition from Rabbi Nachman, which he said about himself, that he said about himself, I never tell people what to do. And Rabbi Nassan described how Rabbi Nachman wouldn't conclusively tell a person what to do in terms of advice practically, but Rabbi Nachman would just contextualize. And I think that's also very, very emblematic of what Rabbi Nachman does with the world. And it's the same thing in Breslov. There's no real mode of dress that everybody goes by. Rabbi Nachman contextualizes, and then he lets you make your own decisions. But he says, let me start you off on a fair playing field, right? Let me level the ground so that you have a chance at life, right? And let me tell you how important joy is, and let me tell you how real Emunah is, and let me tell you that God is with you in all your downfalls. And then you can choose. You have Bechira on all things, but to contextualize life. And so I don't tell people what to do. I try not to. I have a hard time telling myself what to do, but I try not to tell people what to do. But to contextualize, and to tell them and to remind them that everything that I represent, and everything that Rabbi Weinberger represents, and everything that this neo-Hasidic movement, for lack of a better term, even though that term really, began in a non-Orthodox setting, and so we try not to really use it, but in this, for lack of a better term, neo-Hasidic movement and this consciousness, it's about the inside. It's about the pneumius. And we're worried that the more this sort of proceeds to the outside, it won't be like the stream flowing from a source of water into an offshoot that's consistent and that goes, but it'll be like an hourglass, that the sand drips out, and the more you start to focus on chitzonius, the pneumius goes. And that's just what we've seen. And so I don't tell people what to do, but I think that actions speak louder than words. And I've had people tell me that the fact that you don't have a long beard, which, by the way, I probably couldn't try, if I tried. I tried to water it as much as
You're looking at mine, baby.
Yeah, you're doing well with the stash. But I don't know that I could if I tried. But I don't wear the Chasidus Shalavush, and I don't grow my payas out. And there have been students, literally, that have confirmed my impression that by doing so, we're going to have a bigger impact, both in terms of communicating the message, as well as being able to embody this reality that you can still stay grounded within the yeshiva movement, and you don't have to move to Tzfat, and you don't have to start wearing colorful scarves or tcheles. You can be a normal, healthy, well-adjusted husband, father, student, a member of society of a regular shul, and look like everyone else, but there's a fire burning in your heart that transforms everything. That's the toaster oven. To take your cake, that's the same ingredients out of the fridge. That's nice. I mean, it works. But then you put it in a toaster oven, and it's mashu acher.
Rabbi Joey Newcomb says, "Yesh pnimius v'yesh chitzonius, v'pnimius hu eker." I was fascinating. We were listening to a song on Motzei Shabbos, and we're singing, dancing to it. And my daughter is 7. She's like, "What does pnimius mean? What does chitzonius mean?" And I said to myself, how lucky we are that at 7 years old, she's able to have this concept of these insides, these outsides, and v'pnimius hu eker. And that's the
Absolutely. I just want
at such a young age. So
for sure. Ashracha, and you should be able to see much more, nachas over the years and growth, Be'ez Hashem, as a family. But I want to talk about Joey Newcomb for a second, because this is important. Because, like I mentioned before, this consciousness is trying to capture that pre-institutionalized or primal sort of Hasidic energy as it existed in the Beis Medrash of the Baal Shem Tov, as it existed in the Bati Medrash of the Maggid Mizrich and all of his students. Back then, it was a grassroots movement, and that's exactly what's happening today. It's a grassroots organic movement. It is starting from Jews all over the world that don't receive this from a Rav, but they're oftentimes waking up to it in the course of their regular daily lives, being exposed to the torchbearers of this movement that's so emblematic of the spirit of Chasidus, has multifarious channels, that isn't just expressing itself in shiurim, which I'm doing, and isn't just expressing itself through various different art projects, for example, that people are involved with. You remember, Thank You Hashem, El did a big art project. Who ever heard of art as inspiration? But that's what Chasidus is. And so Joey Newcomb and so many others, Eitan Katz, for example, has been doing this for years. Or Shlomo Katz, even though he's more Rav and teacher, that's also something people don't know, than musician, but Shlomo Katz has also been doing this for years. Yosef Karduner's been doing this for years. Chaim David's been doing this for years. All the way back to Rav Shlomo. Ultimately, Rav Shlomo Katz spent 40 years of his life doing this. But this is how it needs to happen. That people need to understand that there is more than one way to connect, and that it's going to be the grassroots, simple, pashit chevra. Even though Joey also, not to take away from the chashivas of any of these people, or if Joey's, is a rebbe in yeshiva also, right? And where do you think he gets that inspiration from? It comes from the Sfarim HaKadoshim, but it comes from these unlikely places. And in Rabbi Nachman, for example, and I wrote about this on Facebook a number of months ago in Torah Gimel, in Rabbi Nachman's lesson on music, which is the third lesson of Likutei Moharan, Rabbi Nachman connects music with the Ruach of Mashiach. David HaMelech, right, where David Malka Mashiach is descended from David, was a musician. And there's something about this very deep kind of education that music is able to accomplish, even more than text-based learning, that is able to impact, that's able to imperceptibly have a very, very, very strong impact. And so I mentioned before there was this interchange between the Hasidic world and the non-Hasidic world, where sort of there was concessions made on both sides, where the Hasidim became a little bit more tame and the Litvischer world became a little bit more emotional. And that's obviously everything's with Hashgacha L'Yaina. And that's why I say you don't have to identify as Chasidus, just be with Pneumius, be with heart. I don't care what you are. You be the biggest Litvak in the world. And by the way, real Litvaks are with energy, with fire. With Noach Weinberg was a real Litvak, right? And he lived with Pneumius and he lived with Chias. You look in Ali Shur, which every Mirbacher has on their shelves. I don't know if they're learning it, but they all have it, right? If you look at the second Chelek in Ali Shur, which is after Revolba, who was my father's Rebbe, which I mentioned, and my grandmother's Rebbe, also in Lidingö in Sweden after the Second World War, and so he taught two generations. So I feel very connected with Rav Shlomo, Volba as well. And I'm learning, the second Chelek after he was exposed to Rav Tzaddik, after he was exposed to Chasidus, and you see again the same thing. You take off your glasses, and it's a Hasidic Rebbe. Or Moshe Feinstein and Darash Moshe, you take off your glasses, mamish, you're sitting at a tish, right? The tires that he says, they're out of this world, right? And so I don't care what you are, I don't care what you identify with, but the pneumius, that's what it's about. And so I wrote over there that with this interchange, music is playing a tremendous role to impact, again, in an imperceptive way, to impact the mainstream. How many thousands of Litvische Jews who never opened the Chasidus Sefer in their lives are driving down the street and playing Joey Newcomb's album and hearing Yesh Pneumius, V'yesh Chitzonius, V'ikra Pneumius, and the rest of the songs on that album, right? They're not just songs. And I told Joey this after.
They're not songs. I think they're tefillos. I think they're it's a
tefillos. I told Joey, I said, listen, I never ever buy music. Mamish, I never buy music. I don't really have time to listen to music. I never buy music. And I said, initially, I'm buying your album just because I can't wait until it's on Spotify, and I have to buy your album. And then I listened to the whole album in one shot. And I called Joey up. I left him a message after, and I said, Joey, I still never buy music because that wasn't music. Because your album is not music, because your album is teachings, is Torahs. And by the way, on a lesser level, but it's also there, the impact that Avram Fried and that Mordechai ben David, both Chabad and Breslov respectively, or Mordechai ben David being connected to Ravitcher Meyer Morgenstern of Breslov, and Avram Fried obviously being a Chabad Chassid, the impact that their music has had, and again, it's a subconscious thing, but it impacts and it moves us closer. And so it's a wonderful thing to understand that LPI is one channel. And LPI, Be'ezer Hashem, we're also going to be doing music. I'm a musician, and we're also working on a project to bring the Breslov Shabbos Nagunim out to light in a new way, which we're working very heavily on, mamish, as we speak. I'm recording vocals tomorrow night for one of the songs, so we're mamish working on it. And we do want to incorporate music into it, but to understand that Chasidus, at its core, is the realization and the message to each and every Jew that no matter who you are, and no matter what your background is, and no matter what language you speak, and no matter how you dress, and no matter what your capabilities are, there is a way for you to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is the watchword of the movement. Really, the foundation of Chasidus is wrapped up into a pasuk where Shlomo HaMelech tells us, Bechol drachecha da'ehu. And it takes a little bit of darshaning, because the word da'ehu means know him, know God in all your ways. But the Hasidic masters teach that the word das can mean knowledge, but it could also mean intimate connection. And that's why we find it in the first context when the word das is used, is in the relationship between Adam and Chava, Vayeda Adam as Chava Ishtai, which means that they had that intimate relationship between husband and wife. And so say the Hasidic masters, you can build an intimate relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. B'chol drachecha da'ehu. You can connect to him on the deepest level, make him a reality in your life, not in some frum, way, but just in this beautiful way to understand that there's this energy, this Ein Sof, not to limit God into that three-letter word God that we created, as opposed to him creating us, that three-letter word. The Ein Sof, this infinite being, this infinite all-knowing power that has been with you from the womb, that understands every aspect of your life, that's with you all the time, accompanying you at every moment, B'chol drachecha da'ehu. You can know God through learning. You can know God through listening to Joey Newcomb's music and to everybody else's music. I think I promoted Joey more than myself here. But to listen to everybody else's music, we're going to have to send him the recording. But to listen to, and through your work and through your occupation and through your hobbies and through a dinner at a restaurant for your wife's anniversary, through your anniversary with your wife and through your birthday and through your relationship with your children and through every single aspect of your life, b'chol drachecha, there's an opportunity for intimacy, da'ehu, to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is what we're missing. And so people kvetch about the no talking in shul, and they have rabbis on podcasts, and everybody's wondering what we can do about this problem. We have to bribe them, and we have to make people sign contracts, and we have to give out treats to the kids and to the adults, and we have to... Why can't the answer just be that if people came into shul and understood that they're about to enter into an intimate, meditative, experiential communication with the master of the world, who's their best friend with a capital B and a capital F, and knows more about them, and before whom they can feel comfortable divulging their deepest secrets to anybody else, they just wouldn't talk. The experience is that when there's davening, there's no talking. In Rabbi Weinberger's shul in Eish Kodesh, it's not because, which he also makes people sign a contract, that's also true, right, that you have to commit not to talk. But there's davening there. There's davening there. And to people who never...
You want to, and you are. So there's no time for talking, right? Because you're so connected, because it's such a beautiful communicative experience. It's not something that we feel is forced upon us. Mitzvah milashon tzivoy. That's not our relationship with mitzvahs, that they're commanded upon us, that we have to do them, and this is our obligation and our chore, but rather mitzvah milashon tzavsa. The Aramaic word, which is also related to the root of tzivoy, to command, means tzavsa, means to connect. And when it's mitzvah milashon tzavsa, when our Avodas Hashem has that element of ava, and of course it has to be a balance. That's one of the principles of LPI. One of the values of LPI is the balance between nigla and nister, between agada and halacha. Those two things have to stay very, very much connected, because when you begin to view halacha in the prism of agada, you realize that it itself is agadic. You realize that keeping every diktuk halacha is part and parcel of this relationship. So it becomes a beautiful thing. And it's no longer a purely technical, intellectual endeavor to study halacha, but it's the deepest intimacy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we have to keep those two things hand in hand together. But when a person is connecting to this, and when a person is connected to halacha in the prism of agada, and to keep this balance so that your Avodas Hashem is tinged and is leaning toward the aspect of ava, which our generation needs so desperately. This love that parents need to be telling their children all the time, expressly. No, my kid knows I love them. No, they don't. And make it your business every day, and as much as you can, to whisper it to them, to scream it to them, to tell them. And we need to feel this as adults, because we're all grown-up children. We're all little children inside. And to our children, but all of us in that relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if we were to engage with Avodas Hashem in this way of ava, in this way of mitzvah milashon tzavsa, Yiddishkeit would look very, very different. And that's why I say again, keep the institutions, keep the quantity, keep the 6 sons. This is a point I make very strongly in the book. We don't want to do away with anything, but we want to reinvigorate, reinfuse that experience with the lost princess of Yiddishkeit. That's the goal.
That's fascinating. Just, I want to unpack one thing you said. I thought it was a fascinating point that although Chasidus is deeply rooted in its Masorah and its connecting to previous generations, there's an aspect of it that, and I don't know if it's specifically Breslov, but that allows for expression anyway, which you mentioned, but also the fact that it's coming from people who don't have any Hasidic background. And that is part of the answer to losing Chasidus in its ritual of today, just institutionalizing it, is keeping it fresh and keeping it alive with other forms of expression. It's fascinating that that interplay between the Masorah, but also using new technologies and new music and new sounds and new Torah. So that balance, I thought that was really fascinating.
That's right. I mean, when you really begin, like we mentioned before, to learn the Sfarim, you do find that there is somewhat of a tension of opposites. And I'll just speak about one of them, which I just gave a shir on last week. But there are many, and it's nuanced. But one of the tension of opposites, for example, is that on the one hand, to many people it's confounding, it's a stira, it's a contradiction. On one hand, Chasidus is all about the simple man.
And it's all about the value of even a tefillah, like Maisim, all the stories of the Baal Shem Tov, of that little child who doesn't even know how to daven, and he blows a whistling in Kippur, and it's the highest thing in the world. Or you talk about, this simple Jew who didn't even know when to daven, which tefillas, and so he just had a sitter with all the tefillas of the whole year, and every single day he would sit for 5 hours a day and say from the beginning of the sitter from Maida Ani all the way through the Kinnis of Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur davening and the bracha on lulav and menorah and say it all during the day. And to the Baal Shem Tov, this was the highest thing, and he was able to do miracles and all these amazing things. On the one hand, you have this value that even the simplest avodah of a Jew, even without kavana, even without lishma, just going through how precious it is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then on the other hand, you have sharp texts in the Sefer Ma'ari 9, particularly if you look in Parshas Yisro. Parshas Yisro, you should all know, to yourself and all the listeners, I'm sure you know, that Parshas Yisro is like one of the foundational text sources for many of the important Hasidic ideals. Parshas Yisro in Ma'ari 9 is very, very important. We're actually learning with one of our programs now. We're learning Ma'ari 9 with LPI. And that's the Chernobyl Rebbe, who was the founder of the Skver dynasty that ultimately has its roots in Chernobyl, and was a Talmud of the Maggid Mizrach. So that's the Ma'ari 9 and Parshas Yisro. But he has very, very sharp Lashonos, very sharp. If you look in Taldas Yaakov Yosef, the first Hasidic sefer that was ever published by R Yaakov Yosef of Polonia, the primary student of the Baal Shem Tov, or the Baal Shem Tov scribe, one of his earliest students, who was initially a big misnagid. We talked about Mesor, which we'll get to, and he wrote Taldas Yaakov Yosef. The sefer was banned. I mean, people couldn't handle it. The way that he castigated these heartless Talmidei Chachamim and these, for some Mishal Sheker, these rabbis, etc., and the rabbinic establishment, they became so wrapped up in the mind, it became so wrapped up in the quantity that they lost all the simple Jews who felt that there was no hope because they couldn't relate, because they didn't have a Yiddishkeit of a Chol Drachecha. Very, very sharp. You have castigating this. How could a person serve Hashem without kavana? You have to have Ava in Europe. You look in Parak Lamed Zayin and Tanya. If you look in so many different places, you have to have the passion, and without it, the avodah doesn't go up. And Baal Shem Tov once, for example, couldn't walk into a shul because he said that the Beis Medrash is packed, and they said there's nobody in the shul, and he said it's not packed with people, it's packed with tefillas, because none of the tefillas go up. So on the one hand, right, so you have these two seemingly contradictory aspects, where on the one hand, even the simplest expression, the littlest thing that any Jew does is mamash the highest. On the other hand, you have mamash a belittling of even a full, beautiful Avodas Hashem. Rabbi Nachman, for example, in Torah Samach says, in lesson 60 in the Kutumran, he has a lashon over there. He says you could have a person who serves Hashem his whole life, but he's sleeping, and Hashem has no nachas from it. It's a lashon that he uses, which is very much connected with the lost princess, when the viceroy falls asleep and he has to wake himself out of that, which is a conversation for a different time, but that's all in the book, which you'll read about Be'ezer Hashem. So how do you put these two things together, right? And the answer is that Chasidus took into account the winters and the summers of the Jewish experience. Chasidus took into account the humanity of what it is to live as a human being with the human condition, and the varied aspects of what our lives are, or the terrains on which our lives are lived, as husbands, as fathers, as community members, as children, as educators, whatever's going on. And Chasidus basically, and this was another big pillar of my obsession and fascination with Chasidus, borderline obsession with Chasidus, was the way in which there was no area of my life that was any more outside of the framework of Avodas Hashem. It used to be that my learning and my davening was Avodas Hashem, and then when I left the Beis Medrash, it's life. And then when I'm engaged with Avodas Hashem, hopefully, if I have any level of consciousness and I'm not just speeding through tefillah and checking my phone, whatever it is, but that's Avodas Hashem, and the rest of life is living. And Chasidus, like I mentioned before, Rabbi Nachman contextualizes, right? Chasidus recontextualizes or reframes life as b'chol drachecha da'ehu, right? And so Chasidus understands that there are different times. In Breslov, for example, the two big watchwords of this understanding is Baki Baratzo, Baki B'shov, which means to be an expert in running and an expert in returning. And what that means is that Rabbi Nachman has something to offer you if you're in a Shas Aliyah, with a Ratzah, if you're running, and also when you're in a Shas Yerida. That Rabbi Nachman sometimes is giving you the biggest, ultimate musar, how much you need to do. And if you look in Sichas Aram, for example, Rabbi Nachman wants you to finish Kol HaTorah Kula every single year, Vasikin, Tikkun Chatzos, Shmir Seinaim, Shmir Sabris on the highest levels, and, the aspect of watching what you eat, Taivas Achil, which Bechlal has left the conversation in the mainstream firm world. We don't talk about it at all. Taivas Achila, that's even on our radar, Bechlal. That's on the one hand, but then on the other hand, Rabbi Nachman tells you that when you're in Sha'ol Tachtis U'Mitachtav, that even if you've fallen into a place, there's Lashonos and the Likutei Halachas, a person who transgresses the whole entire Torah 800 times, etc., Hashem is with you, and Hashem is holding your hand, and He loves you. Again, contradictory. But the answer is that as human beings in flux, we need different teachings for different times. And so in a Shas Aliyah, we need to be connected to the understanding that we need to shoot for everything. In a Shas Yerida, we need to have that understanding that Lo Yolecha Amlacha Ligmar, and that Ratzon is the Iker, and that the most important thing is trying as much as you can. So we do see this interplay of different contradictory aspects. And now we come back after the very lengthy introduction to the question, I apologize, which is very, very important, is that on the one hand, you see the Chasidus has this fire of individuality, and this fire of originality, right? And that's on one hand. On the other hand, you see that for certain Hasidic movements, it is very, very, very ritualized. It is very, very Mesorah oriented. So how do we reconcile these two things? And that's the question, right? And so I was just trying to paint the portrait that Chasidus Bechlal has many, many of these different tensions, right? And that's where life is lived. A good life is lived in a tension of opposites, right? Many people hang out in the middle, but they're just in the middle because they were in the middle. But if you live in the middle because you're being pulled to two extremes at once, it's pulsating, right? And that's where we're trying to live, in that tension of opposites. So I would say that there's different bechinas, there's different aspects. On the one hand, there are certain Chasidusin that are very, very ritual, but within the ritual, if they were learning the text, they would be able to find their individualism within the originality. And then there are other Chasidusin that are very, very focused, more on that initial pre-institutionalized spirit, which I would say Breslov is very much part of. Rabbi Nachman, only 2 generations after the Baal Shem Tov, felt that he needed to reveal what he revealed to the world because of the institutionalization in 2 generations. It was the Baal Shem Tov's great-grandson. He felt already that it was becoming, that they were losing it, Can you imagine? 2 generations. So that's what it was about. I'll just mention one other cute anecdote that I think is relevant here, is that one of the Hasidic masters, after he took over his from his father, the Hasidim, in many dynasties, that's how it is, a dynasty. It goes from father to son, right? But Anshel Kedoshim, right? That just by virtue of being born from a tzaddik, they have a special, a spiritual status. And the Hasidim saw that this Rebbe was not doing anything that his father did. So Mamash not continuing the minhagim. He wasn't continuing the hanhagas. He wasn't and they were confounded by this. They were confused. They were a little bit upset, perhaps, especially the older Hasidim that their whole lives, lived the Chasidus a certain way. And over here, the Tish was in the morning instead of at night. He was doing his own thing. So they came to the Rebbe to complain, and they said, Rebbe, I don't understand. They said, you're not following the Messiah of your father. You're not carrying out the hanhagos of the way that this Chasidus was always, through the generations, certainly the way that your father did it. And he looked at them with confusion. He said, what are you kidding? He said, I'm exactly like my father. He said, my father did his own thing, and I'm doing my own thing. And I'm exactly like my father. So there's a way in which you can have a Mesorah, but it's a Mesorah of individualism. You understand? So that's what Chasidus is. It's a Mesorah. And throughout the generations, in order to preserve the quantity aspect, we needed to have a mode of dress and a language. And who knows what Chasidus would be if they didn't have that, right? But on the other, and that's why I keep on saying, we don't come to tear it down. We need both. We need the princess and the 6 sons. We need the quality and the quantity. We need the mitzvah and the tzavsa. We need both, the yira and the ava. It's about a balance of both. And it's about reinvigorating the framework and the structure of what we have with the spirit of what we've lost.
All right. Well said, Rabbi Yaakov. That's the in essence, you've spoken to what we're doing with LPI and the fire that's within it. And I want to just transition into the how. How are we getting this message out? How are we going to attract people to this? Obviously, you've written 2 books, a third on its way, as you mentioned, and that's one way, but there's so much power out there at our fingertips, literally at our fingertips, and on our microphones and everything like that. And how do you really, the question starts like this: how do you balance that, the writing of books and the distribution of it online? So that it's like almost
So
to speak to paradoxes. That was
Sure, right. And so let's move into that aspect. And again, I think that we should launch into this aspect of the conversation based on the context of the understanding of Chasidus, which is the concept, like we discussed before, of B'chol Drachecha Da'eu.
Oh, I love that, because I don't believe that they're separated. I haven't found someone who's passionate about what they're doing who's not passionate about how they're getting it out as well. Because the two speak to each other, and they're interconnected. Exactly. They have to be, and that's where the passion lies.
Exactly right. And so, in the run up, to this conversation, I think you mentioned something about the frum world sometimes a little bit lagging behind, and for the most, technologically speaking, right, and societally in terms of those ways of living aspect, we're very wary, we're very cautious, and we've always been, to our credit, most of the time. But I'll remind you that Chabad was broadcasting the Rebbe's Sichos online through TV and through radio, and they had this control room which was way ahead of their time, not just ahead of their time in the frum world, which of course it was, but way ahead of their time globally. What Chabad was doing was unbelievable, technologically speaking. The operations that they run are not to be believed. Where does that come from? And that comes from B'chol Drachecha Da'eu. There is a hashkafa within Chasidus, and I think that Dr. Rabbi Norman Lamb has written a book about this, or at least he discusses within his book the strange sort of meeting point, the unlikely friendship, theologically, between the modern Orthodox and the intensely Hasidic, at least those that are connected to the Hasidic Hashkafa, in that both, for different reasons, both are open to using the reality of the society around them and to engage with that society in a deeper way. And so Chabad, which, like I mentioned before, is connected to the teachings of Chasidus, and therefore is connected to the neshama of Chasidus beyond, the simple framework of it, even though Chabad has plenty of that too, and Breslov has plenty of that. Again, I don't want to generalize. There's yesh, right? There are a lot of Karliners who are also on fire, and etc. You understand? But in Chabad, because they had that sort of stamp of approval from the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, B'chol Drachecha Da'eu, Meloi Chol Ha'aretz Kavod, that God is to be found in everything, Leis Asar Panim Minei, the Lashon of the Zohar HaKadosh, there's no place vacant of him. They were able to look at technology and see an opportunity rather than a challenge, and say, okay, let's embrace it and let's utilize it and let's go for it. So very much myself in the same way, being founded on this pre-institutionalized hashkafa of Chasidus that I connect very, very deeply with, and that has not just transformed my life, but has saved my life, literally saved my life. I would venture perhaps to say physically, actually, but certainly emotionally and certainly spiritually, and I'm a different person. And I've seen that transformation happen in front of my eyes over the past couple of years, just by bringing people in and being able to experience that paradigm shift, right? So Chasidus, which I'm very committed to, is giving me this sort of, like I mentioned, like a stamp of approval to be able to go out into the world and to be able to engage with technology in a healthy way, in a positive way, and to be able to reach people. And I want to make one comment that, it's the messianic is that decisions about the lifestyle of the frum community are largely being made by the people themselves. With regard to internet usage, and with regard to WhatsApp on phones, for example, when did any Rav get up? When did any Gadol get up and say that everyone should have WhatsApp on their phones? Who said that? To my knowledge, nothing has changed since the 2004, whatever it is, Internet Asifa, when they got up there and they said, absolutely don't have it, and if you must have it, filters, and to be fair, WhatsApp for most people is not a must. It's not a must, right? Let's be honest, everybody says, I need it for this, I need it for that. But we have a lot of chats that aren't that. And we spend a lot of time with memes and making jokes and forwarding around Trump things and Biden things and this thing and that thing and Corona jokes until you get it and then it's not so funny anymore. All these different things. So who made that decision? And the answer is that we're seeing a strengthening. Rav Kook talked about this a lot. And Rav Kook, to me, you see him on the wall behind me, Rav Kook, to me, really also serves as a paradigm, historically, for this blend of Halacha and Agada, a Talmud Chacham of almost unparalleled prominence, who studied under the Netziv in Volozhin, who came very much from the yeshiva movement from his father's side and was Chabad on his mother's side, and then went to engage deeply with all the Hasidic masters, particularly Breslov, which Reb Kook once uttered an enigmatic statement in Yiddish where he said, Ich bin Rabbi Nachman. He said in Yiddish, I am Rabbi Nachman, whatever that means. Fascinating. But so I connect very deeply with Rav Kook, and many people are like, what does Chasidus have to do with Rav Kook? But once you understand that the Chasidus that I'm talking talking about is not the Chasidus that most often comes to mind, but it's an intellectual and emotional and spiritual revolution. You understand that this was Rav Kook. This mamash was Rav Kook, right? So Rav Kook spoke about before Mashiach, the strengthening of the collective soul of the Jewish nation, where we're going to have the courage to be able, in the way of Hillel, who said in the Gemara Psachim, Im loy neviim heim b'nei neviim heim, that the Jewish nation, if they're not prophets, they're sons of prophets, and that our souls collectively, even the simplest Jew, is connected to a very deep, intuitive feel for the Ratzon Hashem that then is starting from a grassroots sort of way, and then the Rabbanim get WhatsApp. Why do they have WhatsApp? They need WhatsApp because the whole Kehillah has WhatsApp. Now, where did it start from? Did the Rav get up and say to the Kehillah, Chevra, it's mutter? No Rav said that. But then, where did he get WhatsApp on his phone? And the answer is because there are paradigm shifts that are happening from the bottom up. From the bottom up. If you look, for example, at Mishpacha magazine, what Mishpacha magazine has managed to accomplish, the issues that they have managed to raise to the public discussion by laymen, by people who are, just for example, the reader's right? Or all of those inbox, I don't know exactly what they call it, that segment of the newsletter, but we have people that are talking about things, blogs, for example, podcasts, where they're not Rabbanim, and they're not people that we would look to for halachic guidance, but at the same time, we are becoming more confident with regard to what we have to say, and change is being affected from the bottom up. And so we find that the majority of the frum, and I would say the centrist, right? Not modern Orthodox, and also not very yeshivish, and also not very Chassidish. But the centrist, I would talk about Muncie, I would talk about Five Towns, I would talk about Flatbush in Brooklyn, I would talk about different out-of-town communities that align with the yeshiva system, but at the same time are working, balabatim. This is where they are. They are on their phones. They are on Facebook. They are on WhatsApp. They are on Twitter, increasingly on Twitter. They are on Instagram, right? They are on the social media platforms, for the better, for the worse. Again, everything needs to be in moderation. Forget about spiritually. I think you can go absolutely mental. And I think that, very much so, we are being exploited by these companies. Like there was a documentary that came out about it called The Social Dilemma, which is really frightening. There was some backlash against it, but I think it's very eye-opening, to realize like what's behind the screen and how you're being manipulated. But at the same time, we believe, again, it's out there, people are utilizing it, and we have to go ahead and combat all the darkness that's possible. And again, proceed with caution, absolutely. And this is not going to say that I'm anybody to give a haskama on what you should do, but you're anyway making your own decisions. You anyway didn't get a haskama to have Instagram, right? You spoke to your Rav, and your Rav said you should have Instagram? No, right? So anyway, you're doing it. So I need to go ahead and be where you are. Again, with a word of caution, filters are of exceeding importance. And this is not a frumkeit thing. Again, I never, when I talk about the Indian of Tikkun Bris or Pagama Bris, I don't talk about the Gehenim you're going to get. I talk about the Gehenim you're living, because it's much more real. So forget about spiritually speaking, just emotionally. Ashrecha ba'olam hazeh, right? The Torah is supposed to give us olam haba in this world. That's what it's about. Forget about schar of olam haba. And so, very, very important to have filters, but this is where people are hanging out, and this is where I am attempting to reach them. So the books it's for everybody, right? The books is also, there's a mode of education that comes through written word, that simple sound bites and little short clips. You don't get that, right? You don't get that. And there's a way of really pouring your heart into a book that I cannot do in a Facebook post. And there's Shabbos, where many people are reading books, and it's something that you can have at your side, that you put on your night table, and that even though you may not be reading it, but it's on your bookshelf and you remember it, and like your fate, that stage of life was associated with this book, and so on. So books, that's my primary mode of communication. I enjoy writing. I've been writing my whole life, and B'chazei Hashem, I think that I'm getting a little bit better at it as time goes on. But I really do enjoy writing, and I love the freedom of being able to really lay out an idea without needing, to feel pressure to say something profound in one sentence, right? I like having that freedom, because that's what Chasidus is. Chasidus is not little sound bites. If you look in Torah R from the Balatanya, if you look in Torahs from the Kutumran, they go on for pages and pages and pages and pages. So yes, we're sending out little quotes, which is very important to keep people engaged. It's shareable, it's profound, it's thought-provoking, and that's on a daily basis. We're sending out quotes from the Chassidim, text-based, like we said before, to drive people to look up the text. That's why we give a source for everything. We want you to engage with the text itself. Everything's been translated, Kemat. Everything's on Sefaria, Kemat, it's totally free, open source. Everybody's able to go go ahead and to engage with these texts. But the book is very important because that's going to really build the hashkafic foundation to lay it out. And that is what the story of our lives is. It is a textbook. It is not just another book. I don't know that I'll write another book anytime soon, really, because I'm really focused on pushing this and marketing this as the textbook to sort of contextualize, to sort of create this parable or metaphoric background to understand what this incredible movement toward Chasidus is in the frum world. Like, what is it all about? Why are we seeing mainstream performers like Eitan Katz and Yosef Nukem quoting these sources and speaking in a way that nobody heard in yeshiva? What's that all about? Why are we seeing kids dropping out of high school and then 4 years later you see them growing little payas and carrying a whole set of svarim under their arms that you never saw before on a bench in the basement? What's going on? Why are thousands of people listening to Rabbi Weinberger packing in to a Lag BaOmer event, packing into a Eish Kodesh Hilula that Uman is blowing up, not this past year, but 60,000 people? What is it? What is it? These are otherwise normal people. These are your next door neighbor in Flatbush, right? These are otherwise healthy, normal, well-adjusted people. What is it all about? And I don't believe that there is yet a conclusive and comprehensive expression, a sort of textbook for this, and that is really what I hope with all of my heart and soul to have accomplished with this book. And this is what the theological foundation of the Lost Princess Initiative is. It's the book, and then it's the course that enables us to really isolate the key principles and to learn about them inside, in their context, and then to go ahead and to push it out on social media through different social media content, using Zoom, which was huge, over Corona. I mean, Corona was a terrible, terrible disaster and devastating thing that, wreaked how much havoc and destruction. But I think that, if we can find, a silver lining, I think that Corona really moved the frum community much more ahead technologically. You had people using tablets who would never have used it before, and all of a sudden realized, this can really help me. This is not the enemy. Everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created can be elevated. It's what the Baal Tani calls the klipas noga, right? It's that realm that's in between total ra, which is asur, and total tov, which is a mitzvah. It's mutter. It's mutter. With the right conditions, but to be able to engage with it. And Be'ezer Hashem, we have many, many programs that are planned for the future. Like I said, tonight we're announcing a brand new series, bringing in R Yaakov Danishevsky, who is one of the mashpiyim of this new movement, young, dynamic, eloquent, being able to really, really, express what we're all about. And LPI hopes, again, to bring in all of the different mashpiyim of the movement. And that means musicians, that means artists, that means all the talmidim of Rabbi Weinberger who have been creating their own little mini Eish Kodesh movements, throughout the world, like Rav Shlomo Katz and Joey Rosenfeld and Rabbi Bergen Mevaseret and so many other names, that just immediately come to mind. But we've had 30 speakers or so, and we want to really, we want to become that organization that's focused on the neshama, that's focused on bringing these people together who know how to speak this language, who look like me and you, regular guys, but are speaking a different language that really speaks to the core of what this generation is missing. I'll just close with I don't know if we're closing, actually. I don't know. You're the boss?
Yeah. That's good.
But I'll just close with one Torah from the Baal Shem Tov that I think really puts this whole thing into focus. The Baal Shem Tov taught, because the Gemara says that Ein Adaima, you can't compare a person who learns something 100 times, mea pa'amim lemea pa'amim ve'echad, to a person who learns something 101 times. That's the Pashut Pshat. That's a simple understanding that if you learn a Gemara 100 times and then you learned it 101 times, it's just different. It's different. That's what the Gemara tells us. Many different understandings of what that is. That's the basic explanation. Said the Baal Shem Tov, a grammatical problem. Why doesn't it say lemea ve'echad pa'amim? You can't compare a person who learns something mea pa'amim to a person who learns something halaymit mea ve'echad pa'amim. What's mea pa'amim ve'echad? Says the Baal Shem Tov. He says mea pa'amim is talking about the learning of the Torah that you're doing. But the ve'echad is talking about the echad yachid miyuchad, about the master of the world. And ein adaima, you can't compare somebody who learns that same 100 times to a person who learns 100 times, but with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with the echad. And so I say this, and I said this from the beginning. Baruch Hashem, we have 100 organizations in the frum world, right? We have organizations for everything. We have organizations to help people on every level. We have organizations spiritually and societally, and like I mentioned before, all the different beautiful quantitative aspects of Avodas Hashem, and it's unbelievably miraculous and gewalt, right? It's incredible. LPI seeks to be the one organization for the echad. for the echad. We need the mea pa'amim, but I want to focus people in on the echad, to reinfuse and reinvigorate every single aspect of our relationship with Avodas Hashem, b'chol drachecha, with da'eh, with intimacy, with a conscious relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu who loves you. And that's really what it's all about.
Fascinating. I pretend that this podcast is for my listeners, but really it's just a way for me to talk to you and talk to people who have passion. So I'm not releasing it. I'm just kidding. But it's the passion is what speaks to me, and the fire and the beauty of loving what you do. And we've missed that for a while. And I think you're re-returning that. And Be'ez Hashem, it should be the ve'echad. So
and everything, all the siyata d'shmaya. That's what my
fascinating. Well, you could feel it, you could see it. So that's an awesome thing. If people, what are some of your best channels for people to find you, subscribe to you? Any links I can put in the show notes so people could find it as well?
Sure.
So I'll send you the links. I would really suggest that if a person wants to really, really connect with what we're doing and really become one of the chevra, WhatsApp is the way to go, because then, you really receive all of our content. You see updates on status. You're engaged on a daily level. WhatsApp to me is the biggest social media asset. B'chaz Hashem, we have about 1,000 people now receiving our stuff every day, and we're just starting. I'm telling you, we are just getting warmed up, mamish. Literally, we're just getting warmed up, right? So we're just starting. That's WhatsApp. Facebook, we have a Facebook page as well as my own personal page, which I post things that are separate. I post my own thoughts and my own personal ruminations on life and different, things that are happening. We are on Instagram as well. Again, you'll see all of the links. I assume, we'll attach the links to this. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we are on WhatsApp, we are on YouTube. All of our videos, we have B'chaz Hashem, we're coming up to 50 short shiurim, up to 5 minutes, or some of the most dynamic teachers in the Jewish world, giving shiurim, mini shiurim in Chasidus, right? Really based on text, which is a remarkable thing. So we did, the first series was on Sefer Kedushas Levi. We have 122 quotes, which Be'ezer Hashem on our website, which is not yet launched, and so I can't tell you what the address is yet, but Be'ezer Hashem, that'll be launched, and everything's going to be on there with many, many, many more incredible resources. But 122 quotes with all of the videos for the Mashbiim, 2 a week, and so you'll get that on Facebook, you'll get that on Instagram, you'll get that on WhatsApp, but YouTube, you can find all those videos, and all I can say is that I hope people will go out and buy the book. Be'ez Hashem, you'll see it advertised in the mainstream publications, and I want to make it clear that this is just, I know perhaps every author says this, but honestly, this is not just another book. And I can say that even with regard to my other books, it's not just, those books are in one category. This book is a textbook. It's a game changer. It's a presentation of a hashkafa shlema that can absolutely change your life.
Fascinating. Awesome. Okay.
So alrighty. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. I have to express my gratitude and appreciation for the platform and for the ability to speak these things out. This is also my chazar, my mea pa'amim. Every time I speak about it, it makes a little bit more sense, and it keeps the fire burning.
And hopefully
and it's all siyata d'shmaya, and it's, by me, it's not like you start a small business and like you're wondering if it's going to work. There's never been a more successful business than what we're doing. Chasidus completely and entirely engulfed Jewry in Europe in a pretty similar situation, although it was then physical persecution. Now it's spiritual persecution. So by me, it's not a shema, whether this is going to take off. It will take off. It's taken off, and it's going to grow by leaps and bounds, because this is something that is eminently relevant to whoever you are, no matter what your background is, no matter what you do, no matter where you live, no matter what age or stage in life. I speak in my shiurim to both 18 years old, sometimes 16-year-olds that find me and are in 10th grade in Florida somewhere that are tuning in, as well as 60-year-olds and people that are looking to connect, from all around the world. So there's something for everybody here. It's b'chol drachecha, and we're trying to focus you in on the echad yachad miyuchad. And again, if I can manage to do this myself, dayenu, then it was already all worth it. And if I could help some other people along the way, then it's a life well lived. And I want to make just one more point, is that we don't need for more people to be speaking about Chasidus or using the word Chasidus or speaking about the tzaddikim to believe that the R of the Baal Shem Tov is spreading and continues to spread and is growing. There are different subtle indicators that we're getting closer and closer, in the sense that if you look at the yeshivish world, right, how many yeshivas now host a Ruach Shabbos, right? Or now have kumzitzin, which they never ever would have had. Like I mentioned before, 50 years ago, you couldn't have a guitar in Long Beach, right? Or such a thing was looked down upon, and so on. So
Is it Chasidus? By any stretch of the imagination, it's not. By any stretch of the imagination, it's not. But the impact is there. And you have some of the most popular speakers, right, who are getting to the Balabatim, that are no longer in the yeshiva framework. Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson, people wouldn't associate that with the Baal Shem Tov's life, but it is. It is. And it's presented in its own way. And so all of these things from all angles, like I mentioned before, the music aspect, and the psychologist's aspect, and the art aspect, and more, the wave of the Baal Shem Tov is washing over this world. And that's exactly what Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov. When the Baal Shem Tov had Aliyas Neshama, and he met the soul of Mashiach and the Heichel of Mashiach on a Rosh Hashanah toward the end of the Baal Shem Tov's life, which he wrote in a famous letter to Rav Gershon Kitover, his brother-in-law. He asked Mashiach this most ultimate important question. He says, when are you coming? Emasai kasi mar. What did Mashiach tell him? Kishiyafutsu mayanasecha hachutza. When your streams extend outward. And is there any greater indicator that we're mamish at the threshold, that there's such an intense interest in Chasidus today? And this is the point. It doesn't say likishiyafutsu mayanasecha to the Jewish world. It says hachutza, which means that there are going to be, when Mashiach comes, areas and segments and sects of Judaism that have nothing to do with Chasidus as Chasidus. But the R of the Baal Shem Tov will have penetrated and saturated that as well. Even again, undercover, imperceptibly, from a grassroots movement up, from just a societal standpoint of people, it's like natural selection in a certain way, weeding out those things that are not relevant and opening up, our collective neshama to that which is relevant. And so when Mashiach comes, Be'ezer Hashem, we're going to be able to see the impact that this one neshama, the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, and his great-grandson, Rabbi Nachman Breslov, who really carried that torch and deepened it, and the Chabad movement, and all the different Chasidus, and with all the Svarim and Tzaddikim, we're going to see that mosaic that they created and the effect that they had. And if LPI can be a part of that in this generation, again, it's the biggest privilege of my life.
Awesome.
All right, thank you so much.